doing this. This is something that I've wanted to do for quite a while now, and we just haven't been able to pull it off to get everybody together in the evening because we are here in the morning as well. But it worked out this time, and I'm so happy that we're going to be able to have a Zen panel. I'm hoping that this will maybe lift some of the mystery around Zen and maybe some of the perceptions or not, or maybe deeply entrench them. We'll see. I'd like to say that minus myself, this represents the entire board of directors of the San Luis Obispo Zen Circle. And almost the whole. Yeah, almost the whole Zen circle itself. And then we have quite a bit. Kanjō, Rinkai, and Kōshin are or have been head trainees. Shōgen, I'd like to mention, is my root teacher, so I'm excited to have him here. And Deborah has many, many decades of experience with Zen, and started out with the San Francisco folks. And so there we go. There's our Zen panel. So just a little bit briefly about how this is going to go after just my introduction. Sensei Shōgen is going to share some things on Zen, including a little bit of history. And then after that, we're each going to go in turn and talk about what Zen practice means for us, any sort of like things we want to say about our practice, what we do. Maybe it's going to be about maybe 3 minutes a person to just kind of talk about themselves or their practice in their relationship to Zen. And then there's going to be a short section where we'll kind of ask a few questions for each other. Sometimes maybe you might not have an idea about a question you might want to ask. And so I'm hoping that while we're talking, you guys are thinking up the best questions, which is really any question. I'd like you to think about anything you've ever wanted to ask about Zen. And then before we start, I would like to apologize to Sylvia, because she sent me a lovely email about me mentioning a few words about the Mokugyo and why we hit the Mokugyo for the Heart Sutra. And I told her that I would get back, and I asked our abbot at the temple, and I asked Sensei Shōgen, and Sensei Shōgen might be able to say a little bit more about this in a minute. But I believe the general consensus was to just keep the beat and imagine having a monastery with hundreds of monks trying to keep everybody together. Also, the Mokugyo serves as the heartbeat for the sutra. And the Mokugyo is also called the wooden fish. It has 2 fish holding a pearl or a precious jewel. And so that was a few words, and I'm sorry I didn't mention that at the beginning of the service. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sensei Shōgen. Sensei Shōgen.
Who should be mic'd? Is that working? Okay, good. All right, well, welcome, especially all you newer folks. It's wonderful. I started my practice here at White Heron Sangha over a quarter of a century ago. That sounds pretty impressive. And yeah, I have a lot of close friends here. Some of the folks that are with White Heron Sangha are with our Sangha as well. Clay, who is on your board of directors, and of course, Deborah. So I have the only part of this that's like scripted, and it's going to be just a little bit about the history of Zen. So I'm going to keep it very, very short, and I'm probably maybe the last one. You guys have scholars in your midst, like Mr. Coleman, Professor Coleman, who probably knows far more than I do about Zen. But I'll start with something that kind of illustrates the essential point of Zen. Bodhidharma had said this centuries ago: a special transmission outside of the scriptures, no dependency on words and letters. pointing directly to the human mind, seeing into one's nature and attaining Buddhahood. Okay, we in Zen, like every tradition, every sect in Buddhism, we trace ourselves back to the historic Buddha, Gautama Buddha. And we especially take note of this exchange that he had with his first successor, Mahakashapa, when he was in front of an assembly. Some say, I think it was a couple thousand monks, and held up a flower. Didn't say a word. All the monks were wondering, what's going on? We're ready for a talk. And in that midst, in that group, Mahakashapa was the only one that just smiled and became the first successor of Gautama Buddha. That was the first soundless transmission from one to the other. And so we trace ourselves, as most of the lineages do, we trace it back to that time. And of course, this was in India. I get to be there in about a month and a half. I'll be there to all the famous Buddhist sites. I'm looking forward to that. But Buddhism started there, and then we say traditionally, legend has it that Bodhidharma came from India into China. That was at supposedly 520 or thereabouts. Buddhism had already been in China before that, but Bodhidharma brought it and has some real famous exchanges with the emperor there. And I have all those, but I know our time is limited, so I'm not going to belabor that. But it, as Buddhism, and he's supposed to be the first ancestor of Zen, Bodhidharma. So as it mixed with the Chinese culture, it took in a lot of the elements of Confucianism and Taoism, and then spreads to Korea, Vietnam, and eventually into Japan as well. And I'll cut a lot of this out. I know we're running late. So eventually Zen has 5 schools of Zen. Ultimately, the 2 survive, Soto Zen and Rinkai Zen. And maybe you'll have some questions about that. But the first Japanese Zen master to come to the West, and I was reminded this, I have some notes from another talk, was Soen Shaku. He was a Rinkai master, and he attended the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. And I forget about him, but he was there. And then he returned to America. He went back, of course, to Japan, returned to America in 1905 with his disciple, Nyogen Sensei. And Sensei, once he got here, never returned. And he is known for what we call the floating Zendo. That was because he had a little small group, lived in an apartment in Los Angeles on the, I think, the 2nd floor. So that became the floating Zendo. And then he spent the rest of his life both in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And he was doing odd jobs, teaching Zen. And later, D.T. Suzuki was a scholar that came to the United States as well. And that kind of piqued a lot of the interest in Zen and academia. And he wrote many books that were translated into English. He taught at Columbia University for a year or so. And Zen was also made popular by the writings of Alan Watts. And in 1959, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi came from Japan to San Francisco and, of course, started the San Francisco Zen Center. Few years later, Maizumi Roshi came from Japan down to Los Angeles and realized there was a big following of American Zen students and started the Zen Center of Los Angeles in 1967. And the rest, as they say, is history. So there's been in our lineage, and that's the Zen Center of Los Angeles. In our lineage, we now have, I think, about 214 teachers that have come out and that have had transmission that relate their lineage back to the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And we're all over the world. I'm only 4 hours away from the mother temple but we're all over the world. And likewise, San Francisco Zen Center, there's a strong lineage there that's likewise all over the world. And on that note, I think that's enough, unless Professor Coleman wants to say more.
Who wants to go first? Head trainee, you go first.
Zen tradition says head trainee always goes first.
Yeah. Or are we running out of that?
Yeah, red light is on.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Gary. Kōshin's my Dharma name. That's on the rock suit. Yeah, I was a little, wasn't exactly prepared to go first, but hey, this is my experience of Zen. Is I came to it when I was 50. It had been kind of some foreshadowing. I read some Alan Watts. Well, actually, it started with Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi from San Francisco, and some other stuff. But it was when I was 50 that I decided to start a daily practice. And yeah, from suffering. It was like, and not just stubbing my toe suffering that was me making it worse. Like I use that practice today all the time. It's like, how can I make this worse? And then don't do that. And so started sitting when I was in 2013 on a daily basis, but it was really my brother. I ran into, I'd been reading another one of Suzuki's books called Not Always So. And at that point, I remember where I was up at our cabin in the hallway, reading, when it just came to me, the page where he says, if you're sincere about your practice, practice with others. So at that point, I had just been sitting on my own. So it was, yeah, I need to find a group to sit with. And my brother had recently moved to the foothills, Sierra foothills, and he found Soto Zen, which I came back to St. Louis, Googled it, and then found these guys. They're this group, which fit my needs, right? So it was 2 sitting periods. So it was, sit down. There was ceremony that I wasn't really used to, but it was kind of like doing things I was uncomfortable with because I wanted to, I wanted to practice consistently with other people. And what they did was what I did. And then, to this day, I slowly practiced with that idea of the value of hard things. So it's like getting my act together and getting down to the Zen practice every Thursday night. And then when we started practicing on Tuesday mornings, that, at 6 a.m., that was a little tough. We do it online now, which is a little bit easier. Go downstairs and practice in the morning. And then now on Sundays. The point of all this is I've gotten better at not making it worse. And as kind of Zen is, in my experience, my Zen is a pretty simple program. I don't do a lot of studying because I'm not a big studier, but I do a lot of practicing. I'm a physical laborer, and it provides ample opportunity for me to practice Zen as I work. I think the last thing I'll say is what I've found is the posture. And physically, I practice Zen, and then I can see how my mind wants to get in the way all the time, whether it's on the cushion or it's in my work. If I can go back to the feeling of what it is to sit on my zafu, on a zabuton with other people, sitting still, not scratching my ear when I want to scratch my ear. I don't know. It just kind of works magically. It's not a intellectual exercise, and that's far too long for me. So I'll pass it on. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Gary. Kōshin. Kind of startled you, didn't I?
Yeah.
I probably haven't called him Gary in about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Yeah. My name is Geoff, or Kanjō, also on the back of the Roxu, in case I forget. Thank you, Sensei. Exactly. Wait, what? Oh yeah, that's right. It's right here. I've been practicing with the group and with Sensei Shōgen since I think 2010. I actually found the group on Craigslist, which I hear still exists. But it's the first and well, one of the only 2 times I was ever on Craigslist. The other was to get a bicycle. But it was very fortuitous because I think you said that was the only time you ever posted on Craigslist. And I
have no memory.
yeah. So, but like Kōshin, I was looking for a group to sit with. That was, gosh, it's 2023. So that was 13 years ago, right? So yeah, time flies. So my beginning as a Zen practitioner goes back to around 2000 when my father-in-law died. And I grew up without any religious experience in the home and no religious tradition. And I was struck by everything that I saw in the Christian services that I went to. My wife's family was Episcopalian, and they had a pretty strong and stable religious tradition in their family. And I attended church with her, and that was interesting, but not ultimately my thing. And I spent a lot of time reading. And the thing that I connected with actually was Buddhism. And in particular, a couple of the Zen books were very important to me early on. And one of them is Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is still a wonderful book and still important to me. But the one that got me to sit down actually and follow the meditation instructions, I always say, like baking a cake, just follow the instructions, was Thich Nhat Hanh's Miracle of Mindfulness, a wonderful little book. If you've read it, you probably know. But and right away there was something there, and I realized what was missing was I went with my wife's family to church on Sunday, and that was it. Then we went back to work or school or whatever it was, and then we went back again on Sunday, and what was missing is what I later learned as practice, something that you do rather than something that you hear about or attend or believe. And that's important to me because not growing up in a religious tradition, I didn't have any beliefs, and I didn't understand how to start out with belief. I had to start out with experience, and sitting on the cushion was a real experience. So for me, that's sort of at the heart of my Zen practice, is my actual experience. And one of the things that you like to remind us is that that Maizumi Roshi used to remind everyone that Zen is your life. And certainly as a board member, sometimes it feels that way. But also in an experiential way, Zen is my life. I'm practicing my life, plain and simple, not something special or something different, not some idea about a thing, but I'm just here with all of you, looking at your smiling faces. And that's it.
I'm Deborah. I have a Buddhist name, but I don't use it, so I won't bother to tell you. I'm too rebellious. Well, I hadn't planned to talk about how I got here, but I guess I will, since we seem to be doing that. I started sitting when I was at UC Davis back in the 70s. And I was lucky enough, we had a very small group. I think there was 4 people in it. And somebody from San Francisco Zen Center came up once a month and sat with us. And for me, you know, I started reading about Buddhism when I was in my teens. I read Alan Watts and some other people. And I had a boyfriend who'd introduced me to Suzuki Roshi's, some of his talks and things. But right from the beginning, I think the thing that got me about Zen was that it just felt true. And it didn't feel like there was a lot of extra stuff. You know, it just felt very direct, very true to my experience. Not to say that I understood it, but the questions that I had about life, it seemed like it addressed them very directly. And I think from a very early age, I had the question of, probably we all do, what is this? How do I fit in? Or feeling that you don't fit in sometimes, you know, that there's a world and there's a self and you don't understand the relationship between them. And I think Zen from the very beginning, even when I didn't understand what people were saying, addressed that. And, you know, I know I've said this here before, but I have a favorite quote that I have had since I was at Tassajara, and that is, to believe in Buddhism is to believe that one is inherently within the way, not lost, diluted, nor upside down, that there is no increase nor decrease or no mistake. And I vowed when I was at Tassajara that I was going to, that was my vow, you know, to believe that. And I think it was my vow before I ran into that quote or even ran into Zen. And I feel like, I think what you were saying, that the direct experience, you know, that Zen is, you can read all these teachings and somebody can tell you that quote and it doesn't mean anything unless you begin to experience. And Zen really emphasizes that direct experience. And I think for some people that's harder. I had people tell me when I was younger that Zen is sometimes considered the steep path. And that my understanding, I've come to understand, it's like some traditions, you know, like if you go for a hike and you have to get to the top of the hill, you know, you can go straight up the side of the hill, or you can go up the switchbacks and, you know, stop at the springs on the way and do all that kind of stuff. And Zen tends to just kind of go, well, we're just going straight there. You know, it doesn't give you a lot of entertainment along the way, I think. But I love that. See, yeah, I love that. I love the directness of it. And so I spent about 12 years at San Francisco Zen Center, and then there's a big hole in my practice. And then I came and started practicing with these guys in 2017 regularly, although I called you, I think, back in 2000 or 2010 or something like that, but never showed up. So anyway, I guess one of the things that I'm finding, and I think the thing that's most fulfilling to me, is that Zen has allowed me to, some of the time, begin to feel completely integrated with the universe. And I have spent a lot of my life feeling not integrated, you know, and separate. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Maybe I am. And you guys have all felt completely confident at home. But anyway, I think that's the biggest gift to me, to feel that there's no separation.
James Coleman will remember this story. There was a very famous Korean Zen master in Los Angeles with a group very much like this, and it came his turn to speak. Nothing. Somebody eventually in the back of the room started clapping. He said nothing, but he was a Zen master. I'm not. So you're stuck with some words. And you can actually go to www.slozc.org to get my whole bio. So I'm not going to spend much time on it, other than to say when I was practicing here, I just had kind of the realization. This was on a special anniversary from Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse's book. And I was camping up at Big Sur and came to the realization that I wanted to find a teacher and to really get serious about my meditation practice. And that's what brought me to ZCLA. And so that was 23 years ago. This will be the start of my 24th year in October. And I'll just, again, I want to have a lot of time for Q&A. So I'll just say that what I see in my life after all these years of practice, and all of these folks here have heard this before, probably numerous times, but our lives and my life go like this, no matter what. There are peaks and valleys, and I'm sure you can relate. All of us have that. We have these wonderful euphoric times, and we have times when family members have died or whatever the situations might be. But the practice for me has allowed, in the midst of this, is to go through the world with some equanimity. And that's what the practice has done for me. And that's why I will continue to practice until I can practice no more. And as my dad said, I've got many more years behind me than I have ahead of me. So I'll continue to practice.
My name's Russ. My Buddhist name is Rinkai. I was brought up in the Christian church until I was about 18. And I really, one thing about my father's very devout Christian. But he always wanted us to have our own ideas about ultimately what we believe. And one of the things he said is, when you're 18, if you don't want to go to church anymore, you don't have to. And I didn't go. And I've always considered myself a very spiritual person. But for one reason or another, there was things about church I liked, but for the most part, it just wasn't my thing. So for a while, I just kind of looked around, Alan Watts and people like that, D.T. Suzuki, I read. I was also very much in my head. I love to think about everything. And it's something I kind of still in a way struggle with, to the point where when I'd listen to music, I would go, I'd have all these fantasies of where here I am and paint these pictures in my head. But really, I wasn't listening much to the music. It was kind of background, sounded like a movie. You go and you have the background music to the movie. And really, I don't think that's what music is about. So go forward a little bit. I started martial art of Aikido. And through Aikido, I met some people from the local Buddhist temple. And there's a man who said, "You want to sit?" And so I went to his group, as Rinkai Zen. And I remember, because I grew up in a Protestant church and Congregationalist, and they don't have a lot of ceremony and, what's it called, ritual. So I remember sitting the first time with a Rinkai. This guy was a one-man band. He did Makugyo, he did everything, and the chanting. And then all of a sudden we're standing up and going around. I just thought, well, this is kind of cool. All this stuff, we're chanting, we're doing things I had never done before. But really what I really was attracted to was sitting. And I'm very much, if these guys will tell you, I'm the Zazen freak here, or whatever, not freak, but aficionado. So I just started sitting with that group. And then I moved up here and I couldn't find anybody. So I was kind of like my own floating non-Zendo. And I sat for years and years. I moved up here in 84. Met some people from, what's the group in Shasta Abbey, and was with them for a while. And then 16 years ago, I started with this guy here. And he never could get rid of me, so I'm still here. Yeah, the thing is that I've sat many, many, many hours on the cushion, and it is central to everything I do. And as Kanjō and everyone else has alluded to, Zen is a practice. It's not something you take off and put on. It is my life. It's every moment I'm awake, it is my practice. And that is not so hard, I think, to understand. There's a story that Thich Nhat Hanh, real short little encounter the Buddha supposedly had with a philosopher of his time. The philosopher says, "So what is your method?" And he says, "We walk, we talk, we sleep, we eat." And he says, "Everybody does that." He says, "But when we talk, we know we're talking. When we walk, we know we're walking. When we eat, we know we're eating." And to me, that is the basis of all Buddhism, whether it's Zen Buddhist or whoever, is it seems so simple, but to be in the present moment, no matter what, is probably the most difficult thing anybody could do. And that's why it's a full-time practice. Zazen is kind of the gate to that. The idea of Zazen is when you sit, you just sit. And that sounds simple. And if you've ever sat before, you know it's not. But if you sit for days and days and hours, something happens. And it just happens. Not because you make it happen, but it just happens. And one of the important ideas of Zen is what I just was going to say and went out my head.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's very Zen.
is that
That's very Zen.
Zen starts where discursive thought ends. Where discursive thought ends, Zen begins. But there's this seems like a contradiction, because we have sutras, we chant our chants and everything. So what's that all about? Well, to me, it's like a map. The map is not the territory, right? And maps are useful. You can't get what makes a map useful is it takes all the stuff in the world, all the complicated stuff, and it kind of simplifies it so you can go through life a little bit easier. The thing that's hard about that is we sometimes then forget, and we think the map is life. And so part of Zen is just keep remembering that's just the map. And so sitting, being in the present moment, takes us back to what's really happening. And that's kind of exemplified as a Zen thing. If you want to know, and you can pick your favorite fruit or vegetable, but if you want to know what a cantaloupe tastes like, eat a cantaloupe.
Mm-hmm.
Not the most wonderful description of what a cantaloupe tastes like, or a movie of a cantaloupe, or somebody eating a cantaloupe will never give you the idea of what cantaloupeness is. And so that's life. If you want to know what life is, live. And your opportunity is every single moment you are alive.
So we're running behind, so I'll be brief, and we'll do a little bit of a change after I speak. We'll go right to questions, and if it falls flat, then we'll seed the room with some good Zen stuff. So I'm Cory. Most of you know me as Cory. Some of you know me as Ryūjun. I wandered into the Zen Center of Los Angeles in the very early 2000s. And I spent some time in a monastery in New York and started practicing with the Zen Circle. At that time, in 2013, it was known as the San Luis Obispo Sitting Group? Zazen Group, yeah. And eventually I went back to the monastery I lived in before, and currently I'm living at the Zen Center of Los Angeles. I started with Zen sort of by accident. I was interested in Japanese culture, and I was a very, very young adult, and I was suffering from ADHD, and I was looking for a natural way to get off of Ritalin and to really kind of treat my ADHD. And my mother took me to EEG therapy, where they hook electrodes on your brain and you make a figure go around this computer screen by getting your brain waves into particular parameters. And somehow I intuitively recognize that as meditation. And so I found my way to the Zen Center and have been practicing Zen pretty much ever since in some one form or another. And I'll say that perhaps on its surface, Zen can maybe seem formal, maybe a little cold. There's a certain tradition in some Zen monasteries and temples to really race to the top of the mountain and sit and sit and sit and really realize that our lives are finite and we only have so much time. And so Zen emphasizes that sort of practice sometimes. And I've met people before that can be a little bit intimidated by that. Certainly at the monastery that I was practicing, we took more of that approach. It was a lot of sitting and a lot of practice. But the formality of it really, to me, in my experience, is about creating containers for your experience. And the vastness of living our lives can be sometimes too much to kind of catch yourself in. And so the formality of Zen to me kind of represents the creation of forms in order to create containers for our experience. We light incense sticks a particular way, we walk a certain way, we bow a certain way, we sit a certain way. There's an aesthetic behind Zen, that's certain. And all of these things that you encounter at the Zen circle or in a temple or a monastery are there to create those containers to experience your life. And that's what's important. That goes back to that Zen is life, because the practice of Zen, in my experience, allows me to experience my life better. Because if we're not here for our lives, we miss so much opportunity to kind of see ourselves within that. And so that's sort of what Zen has blossomed into for me. And it really does now represent my life pretty much as a whole, because I take that into my work and into my walking and into as much as possible to practice to get to the point where it's embodied enough to be intuitive so that I don't have to think about it.